At my wedding, my mother handed me a white box before 120 guests. It felt weightless. When I lifted the lid, there was nothing inside. My mother smiled. "That's all your marriage is worth." For a second, it sounded like everyone laughed. Then my grandmother pressed a second box into my hands. Brown paper, rough string, warm from her lap. "Take it to the head table," she whispered. "Open it there." I did. The moment a brass pin caught the light, my mother nearly stood up in shock. That was when I knew the empty box had never been the family's real secret. I'm Gina Carter. I was 34 when I got married, and by then I had already spent most of my life learning how to be useful. I worked as a legal assistant, which meant I noticed missing signatures, vague language, and numbers that did not add up. At home, though, I missed the biggest pattern of all. My mother, Linda, loved order. She folded napkins into perfect triangles. She kept framed family photos dust-free. She also decided where everyone sat. At Thanksgiving, my younger sister, Megan, sat beside her. I sat near the kitchen because, as Mom liked to say, Gina's better at helping. So I carried hot dishes through the dining room while everyone else talked. I refilled glasses. I cut the Walmart pie because Megan had brought flowers and Mom was busy praising her for remembering. That was how love worked in our family. It arrived wrapped in approval, and approval had to be earned. When Grandma Eleanor needed a ride to a doctor's appointment, I took the afternoon off. When Megan forgot Mom's birthday, I bought the cake, chose the card, and signed both our names. Mom called me sensible, never beautiful, never brave, sensible. It sounded like praise until you heard it often enough. Then I met Ethan Brooks. He was 37, a power lineman with rough hands and a calm voice. We met during a neighborhood outage when half the block had gone dark. I brought him coffee because the wind was cutting through his jacket. He looked at me over the paper cup and asked, "What do you do when you're not taking care of everybody else?" Nobody had ever asked me that before. Ethan fixed things without making people feel indebted. Once, he repaired my elderly neighbor's porch light and refused the cash she tried to give him. He just smiled and said, "You're good." With him, I did not feel useful. I felt chosen. Grandma Eleanor saw it before anyone else did. She lived in a weathered house beside a lake outside the city, the house my grandfather Henry had built board by board. The place smelled like old wood, coffee, and lake water. The stairs never creaked because Henry had fitted every joint himself. A photograph of him used to hang in my mother's hallway. He was wearing work clothes, grinning beside a length of pipe. Then, one day, the photograph disappeared. When I asked where it went, Mom said, "It was the wrong picture for that wall." I was 8. I let it go. At our engagement dinner, Linda sent everyone a seating chart. Ethan's name was at the far end, right beside the children's table, at the engagement dinner. Ethan's chair was so close to the children's table that Chloe could reach over and steal one of his dinner rolls. Linda called it a seating issue. I called it a message. Halfway through the meal, she set down her wine glass and asked Ethan what a man in his line of work earned in a year. The whole table went quiet. Ethan gave her a rounded number without apology. Linda repeated it slowly, as if she were reading the price tag on something cheap. My aunt laughed. Megan laughed a second later. Before I could speak, Grandma Eleanor pushed back her chair, crossed the room with her cane, and sat beside Ethan. "Tell me about the storms," she said. For the first time that night, Linda had nothing to say. In the car, afterward, she opened the calculator on her phone and tapped the screen with one hard thumb. "This marriage is a bad investment," she said. Then she told me not to expect my share of the family money if I went through with it. A few days later, I stopped by her house with some papers. From the hallway, I heard her talking to a real estate agent about Grandma's lake house. "Clear it out," she said. "It's worth about $700,000. The house was not hers. That should have made me feel better. It did not. 3 days later, Linda emailed the entire family and withdrew every dollar she had promised for the wedding. Ethan read the message over my shoulder. "We'll pay for our own wedding," he said. So we moved everything to a small church hall and spent about $15,000 from our savings. Folding tables replaced rented linen. Friends brought food. Ethan hung the string lights himself. It was smaller than the wedding Linda had planned. It felt more like ours. On the morning of the ceremony, Grandma called and told me Linda had said she was too weak to attend. I found my own ride, she said. And Gina. Whatever happens tonight, don't give her the reaction she wants. She arrived in a wheelchair with a brown paper package in her lap. Linda went pale when she saw it. After dinner, she tapped her ring against a glass and lifted a glossy white box. "A little family joke," she said. There had never been such a tradition. The box was too light. I opened it anyway. Empty. Linda smiled. "That's all your marriage is worth." My aunt laughed. Megan followed. For one awful second, it sounded like everyone did. Then Grandma pressed the second box into my hands. "Take it to the head table," she whispered. "Open it there." Inside was her wedding ring, an old brass work pin, and a note in her careful handwriting. "Across the room!" My mother gripped the table and nearly stood. That was not embarrassment. It was fear. Linda reached me before I could close the wooden box. Her smile stayed in place for the room, but her fingers dug into my elbow. "Hallway, now!" Beside the coat rack. The smile vanished. "Put that away," she said. "Your grandmother is confused, and that house needs to be sold before she makes a mistake." I looked at her, then at the brass pin in my palm. She was not afraid of the pin. She was afraid of where it might lead me. The next morning, Ethan and I drove to the lake with 2 coffees. Grandma Eleanor was on the porch doing a crossword in ink. Not pencil. Ink. She looked up and said, "You came sooner than your mother expected." Inside, the house smelled like cedar, burnt coffee, and the lemon oil she used on Henry's table. She placed a shoebox of photographs between us. There was Henry in stained work clothes, standing beside a plumbing truck. There was Linda at 12 in a homemade dress, her arms folded tight across her waist. Grandma touched that picture. "Kids at school called her the plumber's daughter," she said. She decided she would never be looked down on again. Then she told me the truth. Henry had started as a pipe fitter. He worked winters in frozen crawl spaces and summers inside boiler rooms. Later, he built a small company, paid for Linda's education, and gave her the life she now pretended had come from old family money. Understanding her pain made me ache for the girl in the photograph. It did not excuse the woman at my wedding. Grandma opened a kitchen drawer and handed me a stack of papers. The first page transferred control of the lake house to Linda. It had been prepared. It had not been signed. "She's bringing someone here Friday," Grandma said. "She keeps telling me I'm too old to manage this place. Do you want to sell?" Her eyes sharpened. "I want to live here. I want this house safe. And I do not want it handed to you, because then she'll say you took advantage of me." That was when the part of me Linda had always called merely sensible finally became useful on my own terms. I contacted Claire Morgan, an estate attorney I trusted. She met with Grandma alone. Grandma's longtime doctor documented that she was fully capable of making her own decisions. By Wednesday, the house was placed in a trust with an independent trustee. Grandma kept the right to live there for life. Linda could not sell it, mortgage it, or control it. That night, Mom called me. Her voice was soft. She offered to restore my inheritance, pay for a honeymoon, and welcome Ethan into the family. All I had to do was stay quiet. For one terrible minute, I wanted to say yes. Then I looked at Henry's pin on my kitchen table. Linda thought I would come to Sunday brunch and surrender. She had no idea the house was already beyond her reach. Sunday brunch at my mother's house looked like a magazine spread. White roses, linen napkins, silver spoons beside dishes nobody touched until Linda sat down. At her right hand was the empty chair, the chair I had wanted my whole life. "Sit here." "Sweetheart," she said. Sweetheart. The word still had teeth. I sat beside Ethan instead. Chloe slipped into the chair next to me. Ethan rested one hand near mine, close enough that I could choose it if I needed to. Linda smiled like the morning already belonged to her. When coffee was poured, she tapped her ring against her glass. "I think this family has had enough unpleasantness," she said. She announced that I had reconsidered, that I would be restored to the will, that she would help Ethan and me get properly settled. She even said she was ready to welcome him into the family. Then she raised her glass toward me. Every face turned. For 1 second, I saw the life she was offering, the money, the approval, the chair beside her, the end of being punished. All I had to do was betray Grandma and keep Henry buried. I did not lift my glass. I placed the wooden box on the table. Linda's smile froze. I opened it slowly. First, I slid Grandma's wedding ring onto my finger. Then, I fastened Henry's brasswork pin to my blazer. The tiny click sounded louder than Linda's glass. My grandfather's name was Henry Whitmore, I said, and most of this family never heard the truth about him. Linda set down her glass. Gina, this is not the time. It is exactly the time. My voice did not shake. I told them Henry had started as a pipe fitter. He worked in frozen crawl spaces and boiler rooms so hot his shirts came home soaked through. He built a company with one truck, one toolbox, and hands that never came completely clean. He paid for Mom's education, I said. He helped buy this house. He paid for the life she now calls old family money. My aunt stared at Linda. Megan stopped breathing long enough for Chloe to notice. Linda's face went white. "That is a twisted version of private history," she said. "No, it is the part you erased. I did not mention the school dance or the homemade dress. That pain belonged to Linda. I would not use a wounded 12-year-old as a weapon. But Henry's name belonged at that table. Then I told them about the lake house. Grandma had met with her attorney, alone. Her doctor had confirmed she was capable of making her decisions. The house was now held in an independently managed trust. Grandma had the right to live there for life. No one could sell it, mortgage it, or transfer it for gain. Linda stood so fast her chair scraped the floor. "You had no right." "I did not take anything," I said. "Grandma protected what was already hers. You manipulated an old woman. Then challenge it, the attorney's notes, the doctor's statement, and Grandma's instructions are clear." For the first time, my mother looked smaller than the room around her. "If you walk out after this, you are out of my will, permanently. You will not receive $1 from this family." There it was, the final price. I looked at the empty chair, then at Ethan, then at Chloe, watching me as if my next sentence might become something she carried for years. "You can keep the money," I said. "My worth was never yours to set. No one moved." I picked up the wooden box. Ethan picked up our coats. I walked past the seat I had spent 34 years trying to earn. I did not feel victorious. I felt terrified. Then the front door closed behind me, and for the first time, terror felt exactly like freedom. Linda kept her promise. 2 weeks after the brunch, a letter arrived confirming I had been removed from her will. I read it once at the kitchen counter while Ethan made coffee behind me. The paper felt heavier than it should have. For 34 years, I had imagined that inheritance as proof that I still belonged somewhere inside my mother's heart. Now, it was just a number I would never receive. I folded the letter, placed it in a drawer, and went to work. That did not mean it stopped hurting. Some relatives called to tell me I had gone too far. One aunt said family history should remain private. A cousin told me I had embarrassed my mother in her own home. I asked him one question. "Were you embarrassed when she gave me an empty box at my wedding?" He went quiet. A few others sent short messages late at night. They said they had never known what Henry did for a living. They had never known the lake house belonged to Grandma. They had assumed Linda's version of the family was the truth because nobody had ever challenged it. I did not try to recruit them to my side. I was done building teams. I set 3 boundaries with my mother. I would not accept money from her. I would not attend gatherings where Ethan was treated as less than anyone else. And I would end any conversation the moment she insulted him, Grandma, or me. Linda called once after receiving notice about the trust. Her voice was cold. "You have torn this family apart." I stood by my kitchen window, watching Ethan scrape ice from my windshield before work. "No," I said. "I stopped helping you hold it together with fear." She hung up. We did not speak again for 3 months. 6 months after the wedding, Grandma still lived at the lake. Every Saturday, Ethan and I drove out with coffee, groceries, and whatever tool he thought he might need. He repaired the loose porch rail, replaced 2 cracked boards on the dock, and fixed the kitchen window that had been sticking since winter. Grandma followed him around with a flashlight and gave instructions he did not need. He listened anyway. I sat at Henry's table and did the crossword with her in ink. The photograph Linda had removed years earlier was back in the hallway. Henry stood beside his truck in stained work clothes, one hand resting on a coil of pipe, smiling like he had just heard a joke worth remembering. The wooden box sat beneath the picture. Grandma's ring stayed on my finger most days. Henry's pin stayed on my work bag. Not because I needed to prove anything, because I liked carrying evidence that ordinary hands could build something lasting. Megan called for the first time in early spring. She talked about weather for 5 minutes before finally saying, "I should not have laughed." I waited. I knew Mom was being cruel. She continued. I laughed because I did not want her looking at me next. It was not a complete apology, but it was honest. That mattered more. She began calling once every few weeks, carefully, like someone stepping onto a frozen pond and listening for cracks. Chloe changed faster. She asked Grandma to tell her about Henry. She wanted to know how plumbing worked, why pipes froze, and whether she could learn to fish from the dock. One Saturday, I found her standing beneath Henry's photograph. "Why did everyone act like his job was bad?" she asked. I looked at her small face and realized this was how a family story changed, not through one perfect speech, through one child refusing to accept the lie. At work, I began taking additional training on elder protection and financial coercion. I started helping older clients slow down before signing payments, bills, property papers, or agreements they did not fully understand. I did not become fearless. I simply learned that carefulness was not weakness. It was a form of protection. One evening, Grandma and I climbed the stairs Henry had built. They still did not make a sound. She ran her hand along the railing. "He always said strong things are built where nobody is looking." I thought about the trust, Megan's phone calls, Chloe's questions, and the quiet life Ethan and I were creating. Linda had measured my loss in money. By that measure, I was poorer. But I no longer checked my value against her approval, and that was the first wealth I had ever truly owned. My mother gave me an empty box to prove my marriage was worth nothing. My grandmother gave me a second box to remind me that worth was never hers to decide. One box held cruelty. The other held truth. Real love does not demand obedience. It does not measure people by money, job titles, or inheritance. And understanding why someone hurts you does not mean you must keep letting them. If you have ever had to protect someone from their own family, share your story in the comments and subscribe so you do not miss the next story.